Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Monday, August 4th, 2025. We're here this afternoon for a work session with Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources. I'm Kristen Stevens, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. With me are my fellow commissioners, Commissioner John Cafalas, Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally. And we will get started. I'll turn things over to Leslie Ellis, our Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources Director. We have a lot of people in the room and at the table, so we'll just have folks introduce themselves as they come up. But welcome, everyone, and we're looking forward to the meeting.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. We will jump in. Our bulk of our agenda today is on the transportation funding topic. So I'll introduce folks here briefly, and then we have a quick code compliance question that Amy will bring to you and some other updates after that. So I think the bulk of our time can be on this first item. So you probably see a lot of familiar faces here at the table. I'll kick things off here on the transportation funding item. And to my right, I have Ryan Winger with Magellan and Brian David Blakely with Public Communications Alignment, who've been part of our team. And of course, Mark Peterson and Todd Jurgens have all been part of the work around this transportation funding item. I'll just kick us off, and then I'm going to hand it off to the gentleman to my right here as we get into some next sections. I do want to acknowledge too, Bill Becker is here from the Loveland Chamber, and I don't know if Ann will be joining us, but we've been speaking with them. We had a meeting with the legislative group on Friday and got some feedback from that group as well, and that was very helpful as a continuation of all of our public communications, and we appreciate the partnerships in the community around this topic. Our focus today is really just to do a quick recap on the public awareness campaign. We did have a conversation with you about a month ago, and Brian was here and shared some of the statistics and work that had been done at that time. So we'll kind of recap that a bit for you. We wanted to focus on the July polling results that just came hot off the press about 2 weeks ago, and that's led us into some next steps to recommend moving forward with a new ballot language and a resolution to potentially put this on the ballot. And then our next step with you as the Board of County Commissioners in making that decision would be to bring it back to you next Tuesday for further conversation and a decision. I put the fact sheet and some other materials up at the dais there for you on the table. And just as a reminder for everybody, we have quite a critical need to fund transportation system improvements that handle safety improvements and bridges that are old in the unincorporated part of Larimer County, as well as address mobility and traffic congestion. And we want to make sure that we invest in a way that we can afford to make the improvements over time. We've had this active web page and information that we've continued to update for the last several months and add things like the new transportation plan, as well as questions and answers from members of the community that we've been hearing. And so that is very current and up to date and something that can be a resource living on and forward and if we move into a campaign season. As you're well aware also, we have spent about a year with the community working on the transportation plan and the safety action plan, and that came to you just last week for approval. It goes to the Planning Commission soon, but this is the real backbone of all the projects that have been identified that are needed to address the needs in the community, and including some focused areas like the LaPorte plan and so on. So those multiple projects are all itemized through that plan and showing up on the webpage. So the conversation that we've had with the community for the last several months, really since earlier this year, is to raise awareness about the funding need for these many projects, and then to make people aware that there's really a choice ahead, that we either need to identify a local source of funding, in this case in the form of a 0.15% sales tax proposal, or move in a direction where we won't be able to do all the projects that we've identified that we think we need to do as a community through that plan. So that's kind of the quick overview of why we're here and where we're headed. And I'd like to turn it over to Brian here to do the recap and answer any questions you have about the public information that we did for the last couple months, and then we'll move right into the polling results. So just tell me when you want me to
Great,
push
yeah.
these buttons.
So, and this slide was really more for the presentation we did on Friday, just because it kind of reminds people like where we started at. Obviously, last year, and Ryan will go over this in more detail with the survey, but it's just good to remember last year's voting population is very different from this year's voting population. So it's somewhat instructive, but not that instructive in a way, because it's just a whole new set of people that are voting. So we did that post-election survey. Magellan shared with you those results that helped us kind of better understand where people were at in terms of gaps in understanding or awareness, maybe some areas that immediately did resonate that helped us kind of start off that conversation this spring, including some of the key informant interviews that we did as well. So we took all of that information and translated that into some materials, beginning with the website, investinlarimer.co. Got really good interaction on there. I'll go over those numbers in a little bit, but it basically was one place, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week open house, if you will, where people could at any time find out what they wanted to find out. We linked back to the Larimer on the Move website, which was really helpful as well with all the transportation conversations happening. People wanted to know, well, which projects are we talking about? Where would these dollars go towards? If we didn't have dollars, what projects might get delayed or not funded? That really helped. In-person presentations that Leslie, you all, others did in the community helped drive people to the website. And what you'll see in a minute is what really drove people to the website. Of course, this is never not the case, is the public awareness campaign. So that paid media, which often translates into earned media, and we were very fortunate to get some earned media as well out of this. So this shows some of the paid media that we did. I went over this before, but just a kind of quick reminder. Transit meeting in Loveland, for example, there were some ads that we wrapped on the buses. Rural radio stations, went over that last time. Streaming TV, because that's how everyone gets their TV, whether it's on their computer or the television, or even at the gas station and at the local coffee shop or bar that has a TV. E-Blast package, so meaning through iHeartRadio, display video, YouTube. If they click on something that they're interested in seeing in YouTube, they might have first seen a 15-second spot about, there's a transportation funding issue in Larimer. If you want to learn more, visit the website. Meta and Facebook ended up being the most effective, and you can see that graph there. They had over 35,000 views and 23,700 unique visitors. So sometimes a visitor will visit multiple pages, right? So that's why there's the increase in numbers from visitors to the number of views. A lot of people contributed, meaning they engaged with it and asked a question or took our quick poll or something like that. And then the earned media got a really great news story in the Colorado one, as well as in 9 News, and both times those hit, there was an additional spike in interest in people visiting the website. So that was quite helpful, because then people are immediately informed a little bit about what the issue is, and if they want, they can kind of dig in for those that are a little more high information and get a little more of that detail.
Commissioner Shattuck McNally has a question.
Thank you. I'm curious, maybe I'm jumping ahead too much. Is that kind of engagement or spike at outreach and having only having 250 contributors, is that a good, in your mind, good outcome, or what you expect from folks going onto the website and participating? Is that what you would hope to see, or?
It is what we would expect, given what we put into the effort. So it was a significant dedication of resources by the county. Obviously, we're competing with everything, right? Concerts, people buying whatever they want to buy, and commercials in general. But it was very effective in terms of how many people actually visited this site in a short amount of time. And even more effective, and you are jumping ahead of slightly in one area, which I'll get to in a minute, how many people saw that. So not everyone that sees it is going to go, oh, let me click on that. Or if they see the bus ad or wherever, let me go visit the website. But a lot of people at least have seen it, and they'll remember it or see it to some degree and understand that there's an issue going on that they might want to educate themselves on. So this was a very good campaign. And I'll get to this on the next slide. I don't want to jump ahead in case you have more questions about it. But yes, it's what we expected, and we were pleased with how it went and the results that we saw.
And then when you're talking about rural radio, I'm just curious, right across the street is our friends at Pirate Radio. And also, there's the other communications organization that's in the old library downtown that, at the Peterson, have offered us to come and speak and do radio spots on both of them, or communication things. And I don't know if we've accessed that. I'm mentioning this to Michelle, but they've always told me, if you want to come talk about a topic, come over, we'll put you in on the morning radio spot. And then the one, you know which one I'm talking about, is Fort Collins something media. It's down in the basement of the old library, and so they have offered that too. So I just wanted to kind of flag that as well. So pirate radio is pretty popular. So
that'd be a great thing to do.
Okay.
Absolutely, you should do
Thanks.
that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were on KCUL, KFKA, KISS FM, and KIIX AM. So 7 of the top website referrals were paid media. So things like all those different examples that I gave earlier. So almost 96% of the visits were based off of something that we actually paid for. So this is what I meant by a lot more people saw it. So 3.87 million people, or it can be the same person, obviously, but that's how many eyeballs were on those, all those different public awareness ads. Digital was responsible for about 2.8 million of that, and for 45,000 of those clicks. And again, Meta, which is not always the case, was the top performing digital tactic, which is good considering the demographic, because a lot of that is Facebook. And the click-through rate is higher even than most industry standards. So that's, again, to your question, Commissioner Shadegg-Ganali, of how we perform. Even this compared against like people trying to sell things that people want to buy, which is rare especially for something like transportation. Nothing against transportation, but most people aren't going, well, let me tell me about the county transportation system. So definitely met or exceeded industry averages. And I think this is just quick illustrations. We've shared this with the county, like all of the different creative that we did. So this just gives you like a quick reminder of, for example, what did that bus ad look like? What did that digital banner ad look like? And of course, that's what the website does look like. So people could just click on that and learn more and go directly to that website. So that's just a very brief, so that we can kind of get to after all of this effort and awareness and understanding, okay, now where are people, and testing some messages now that people have some understanding of, okay, so now there's an issue. So now that if you know that there's an issue, what would you kind of be more prone to say, I want to put money towards this aspect of transportation versus maybe not so much that other aspect of transportation, to help you all make that kind of final decision about what to do moving forward.
Okay, we're going to switch gears unless you have further questions. Ryan will take you through the polling results, and I think here too, feel free to ask questions as we go and chime in, and we'll kind of probably keep it at a bit of a higher level, and if there are follow-up questions or anything that you need to delve into afterwards, we can do that too. And there's also a copy of these slides up at the dais, and we don't have these yet on the webpage, but we will make them available, and we had given you a summary version of this last week, so this includes all the demographic information and a bit more detail about the geographic distribution and whatnot. So I'll hand it over to you. Thank you, Ryan.
I believe Commissioner Shadegg-Ganali has a question.
Just real quick about the slides, the ones that we just saw, you said those were from last week or the week before, or these were new? They seemed, some of them seemed a little new. Can we get I don't know if we've gotten those.
Yeah, I'll send a copy or
Okay.
give you a copy of that, those first few slides, yes.
Thank you. I like to read things in the middle of the night when I can't sleep. That's fine.
Thanks, Leslie, and thank you all for your time this afternoon. Good to be back with you. If you'll remember, we've done a couple of these different polling results, so we'll be able to kind of look back and see, okay, what was last year like? How's this year going to be different? But as Leslie mentioned, this survey was conducted in July from the 8th to the 21st. You see an example there of what the text message that went to registered voters in the county looks like. And we completed 1,629 interviews. So we have a really solid sample size, which again, just helps kind of drill down, especially into those smaller demographic, different regions, different cities and towns across the county. 2.42 is a margin of error, but what's most important to note is that these results are weighted to what we expect odd year turnout to look like this November. So that's why if you see here, we have the most recent comparable election there, which is 2023. You compare this to last year where about 230,000 people voted. So we're talking about basically 100,000-ish fewer people voting. And generally what that means is that the electorate is just going to be older than it was last year. That's the primary difference. You see there, we're going to look at about 18% are in that 55 to 64 age range, and another 39% are 65 plus. So when you compare that to registration, obviously it's just a comparatively older electorate, which is something to keep in mind as we're moving forward. And again, having seen our survey results before, you'll be familiar with these kinds of questions. We don't just want to jump in and start asking about a tax increase right away. We want to ask some kind of benchmark questions. Do you approve or disapprove of the job the county is doing managing the transportation system? And overall, this is a very strong result. 61% approve, 26% disapprove, 13% no opinion. So again, we're asking this just to make sure that there's no kind of underlying discontent that may not be related specifically to the ballot measure, just to make sure that, okay, we're generally in the right place and generally have strong support. So 61% approve is a great place to start. Another question that's obviously pretty important to know is whether folks believe that the county already has the necessary resources to maintain, repair, and improve roads and bridges in the unincorporated county. And yes, 50% say yes, 30% no, 20% no opinion. Obviously, you'd like for that 50% number to be lower. It would show a more of an understanding of the need. But that being said, it's not all that surprising, and where it would be more of a red flag if it was up around 60 or higher. We've done surveys for other local governments where this number is up around 60, and then you're really looking at a significant climb to convince folks that you don't already have the resources necessary. So 50% is not too bad. It's really not a terrible place to start, and a lot of it just is general, just underlying demographics of what they believe. A lot of it may not be specific to, they couldn't point to something specific in the county. They just generally think that government either does or doesn't have enough resources. Then in the similar vein, do you agree or disagree that the county is fiscally responsible and spends taxpayer money wisely? I always say on this question, we're basically looking for a 2-to-1 ratio for agree, disagree is a good place to be. And there you see you're hitting that 55 agree, 27% disagree, 18% no opinion. So again, these questions just show that there's nothing that is a major concern before we even get into any kind of ballot language specifics. Before the respondent was introduced to the ballot language, we also wanted to ask this question, just to kind of start the wheels turning in terms of the county's transportation system and the potential benefits that could result from this kind of investment. And what you see is that overall, among these 8 different items, it's not that any of them are viewed as unimportant, but there are differences in priorities and differences in intensity, really, if you look at the very important column there. So the top 3, when you talk about improved readiness for emergency situations like fires and floods, reduce traffic congestion, and improve safety, those are really kind of the big 3 that folks say, yes, we need to invest in transportation system because of those 3 things. The others, again, increase options for how people travel around, recreation, job opportunities, housing options. Again, it's not that those are viewed as unimportant. They're just a kind of a second tier in terms of how folks are viewing what they would like to see from these kind of investments. So any questions on those before we get to the ballot language? Great. So again, we want to make sure the respondent understands, the purpose of the survey and what we're doing here. They need to know that there hasn't been a decision made, and we really want to hear from them. And then introducing this idea that even with decades of responsible budget management, the county's needs far exceed available funding when it comes to transportation. So one solution would be a sales and use tax increase that is specifically dedicated to transportation funding. So we're going to share the ballot language with them, ask how they would vote. And you see that this is called uninformed. That simply means that this is the question that we ask them before we give them any other additional information. And then later on the survey, they're going to be the informed ballot question. But here you see the ballot language that was tested. Very similar. Obviously, we're trying to mirror what would ultimately end up on the ballot with some slight tweaks, just because we find that's the best way to get an accurate measurement. If you try and do a paraphrase, it just never ends up working quite as well as trying to reflect the ballot language specifically. So you see the 0.15%, you see the bullet points, and then we ask how they would vote. And 55% would vote yes, 37% would vote no, 8% undecided. Generally, and I'm sure we've made this point before, generally we're looking for 60% in any pre-election polling, simply because there are going to be factors that are outside of your control that can kind of chip away at support, whether it's a crowded ballot like we saw last year, or just a general economic downturn or things like this. But all in all, 55% on the uninformed is a pretty good place to start. We're not completely upside down. Then we're going to share some information with them about about the system, how it's funded, why an additional funding source is necessary. And these, you'll see, are ranked based on those who are much more likely to approve. So basically ranked on intensity in terms of how much they resonate with the respondents. And what resonates the most is simply explaining that this is 15 cents for $100 purchased and would not apply to groceries. So just to back up just one slide, or a couple slides, you'll see this ballot language does not mention an exemption for groceries. And neither did last year's for 1A. So that's kind of something that is pretty important. You'll see that we've kind of gleaned from the survey because that is what resonates the most. And also just explaining the 15 cents for $100 purchase, because sometimes people will put the decimal place in the wrong spot and think it's going to cost them more than it actually will, right? So that's kind of a really important kind of basic thing to have out there. Also, in terms of bridges being 50 years old, failing to meet demands and requirements, that's something where a lot of folks read that and think, oh, that sounds like a problem, right? You don't want to be driving across bridges that aren't structurally safe. And then also just explaining that without other funding sources, the county will only have funding to cover not 50, not 40, 14% of the total need through 2040. So that's something that really jumps out to the respondents as well. Also explaining could be used to obtain outside grant money for the county. Obviously, given what's happened in the last couple weeks, maybe that's a little bit more of a complicated topic than it was when we did the survey. But it's always something that folks look for. How can we stretch the dollars, or how can we make sure we've exhausted all other options before going to taxpayers? Also, just the idea that investing now saves on replacement costs over time. That's something that a lot of folks will understand, that every month that goes by, these things aren't getting any cheaper. And then just the idea that the county receives only 75 cents per month for transportation needs from property taxes. We're starting to see that these don't test quite as well. That one, it's a little bit in the weeds. Folks will say, well, why? You should just fix it. They don't really understand exactly the mechanics behind that. Costs for road and bridge construction materials have increased 50% in the past 5 years. Okay, again, things aren't getting cheaper. Increased demand has contributed to the need. Okay, yep, that's there as well. Although, again, there's just going to be some folks that read that and think, well, we shouldn't have, let so many people move here. Like, we should have done something different, and there wouldn't be so much increased demand. Like, there's always going to be that kind of thinking out there. And then just trying to get the respondents to understand 900 miles of county roads, 421 bridges. It's a significant, a lot of folks probably aren't driving around having those numbers in their head like, wow, we're talking about a lot of ground that the county is managing here. Interesting here, we also wanted to throw out some specifics if they're wondering, okay, what are we talking about? Explain some potential improvements that could happen. Again, 62% are more likely to approve, so this is fine. It doesn't test quite as well as the others. And I think what happens a lot of times when you get too specific is that folks will say, well, I agree with 3 of those 4, but I really don't think we need the 4th one. And so it just kind of backfires in a little bit in that sense. And so, again, after giving them all that information, we're going to ask them the ballot language again, exact same as they had seen before. And you'll see the support increases by 6 points. So from 55 to hitting that kind of semi-magic number of 60 over to 61%. And 29% would vote no, 10% undecided. So this is, again, a pretty strong place to be. It's really nice on the intensity. If you look, 30% definitely, 31% probably. So sometimes you see and it looks like a very high number, but a lot of it is probably, and they're at least a little bit iffy on it. This one, just as many say definitely yes as probably yes. And there are a lot of folks that clearly want to make this investment. You do have, again, over a quarter of respondents that say even after that information, still voting no. and then 10% are undecided. We never want to leave it there. We want to ask the yes and no voters why they would vote the way that they would. Not surprising on the yes voters. They just think the safety improvements are important. They want the maintenance and upgrading of the roads. They see the growth and traffic congestion, and they want to find ways to solve it, not surprisingly. And also, a lot of folks just view the cost as relatively small compared to either some other tax increases that they've seen or, thank goodness we're not talking about property taxes here. No one's going to say, oh, yeah, that's a small property tax increase. But for sales taxes, you do still see that, okay, 0.15, that's manageable. I can control what I spend. It seems reasonable, and especially, again, with those exemptions for things like groceries. Among the no voters, the most common thinking is that it's not specific to the ballot measure. It's just that taxes are already too high. That's the most common response, and they don't want to see taxes raised for much of anything. Again, there's also among the no voters just this idea that if the county were to cut back on what they consider to be non-essential services, which means different things to different people, but among these no voters, they think, okay, if we cut some here and we reprioritize or reallocate existing funds, we could cover this gap. That's their perception, at least. And then again, just going back to financial hardship, cost of living concerns. We also wanted to ask here towards the end of the survey, other than this survey, how much have you seen, read, or heard about the system in the past 3 months? And you'll see it's roughly 50-50. Half have heard no information. 3% have heard a lot of information. 41% have heard some information. So I think this just speaks to the challenge of Larimer County being a very large county. It's really hard to kind of penetrate and move significant numbers to where you're talking to more than half of the respondents. But still, it shows the work that's been done over the past few months and shows that, the awareness is growing. And with more of, a campaign, an educational campaign, it can only continue to grow. To me, this just shows that there's some upside in the numbers. If half of the respondents have seen no information other than this survey, with more education, they can probably be brought along. And here again are the survey demographics, again, weighted to reflect what we anticipate odd year turnout to look like on things like gender, party, age. You see the race, ethnicity demographics, pretty good split among income, which is always good to see. Tenure, obviously a lot of folks in an odd year election, since we are talking about an older electorate, a lot of folks are going to be 20 plus year residents of Larimer County. And then here you see 4-year degree versus non-4-year degree. And where do you live within the county? It's kind of getting cut off there, but you'll see that Fort Collins and Loveland are obviously the two biggest municipalities, no surprise to anyone here. And then you have roughly 1 in 5 that are going to come from unincorporated Larimer County, and then the mix of the smaller municipalities. So with that, I will take any questions, and I can jump back to any slides that you want to review.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions? Commissioner Falls?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentations. I think my questions would be more directed to, so now that we have this information, how are we going to climb the hill when one of the original, or one of the first slides indicated that, what was it about not being, I forget which one it was, but, I think the reference was made, we need to climb the hill because people aren't informed, or maybe it was the one where they talked about the matter of, does the county have enough financial resources to do the work? And it appears that, it's sort of evenly split that we should have the resources. So how do you inform people about that? And then, ultimately the getting more information to educate the voters so they can make informed decisions. So those are two. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that. And if I may, just one other thing, and that's all I have for now, I think, Madam Chair. And I keep bringing this up, that how do we, what are our expectations around 2 county ballot measures that might be asking for sales tax increases and both issues are really important. And I think you know what I'm referring to. So I hope that makes sense, Brian.
Yeah, I'll start, and then Brian can probably talk as well. I mean, I think what it means is that, and it helps to be able to look back to last year and say a narrow loss without much of a campaign. So I think that what's really instructive about these results is that there must be some kind of campaign, outside of the county. Some other group has to take up the baton and do that kind of education work, right? And I think, a lot more groundwork has already been laid on that front compared to last year. So I think generally that's kind of moving in the right direction. But that's really what has to happen is just more education in a way, and it costs money, it costs time and energy and resources, obviously. But with education, I think that's really the takeaway from the survey results is that with education, this can get done. Now, as far as the interplay between two different ballot measures, you're right. I mean, anytime the county asks multiple questions, there's going to be some folks that say, yeah, I'll vote for this and not that, kind of choosing between the two. We didn't introduce that kind of interplay in this survey. We could have, we didn't. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if some folks say, well, I only want to vote for one, they're just going to make a choice. I will say what's at least beneficial is that the folks that say that this is not a large ask on this 0.15%. There's a lot of folks that just are in that frame of mind, like, oh, this seems like a small cost to get a huge benefit to the county, and hopefully that kind of thinking can resonate as they get closer to voting. So.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. I think the work done so far has set up the possibility and given it the best possible chance. You saw the difference between voting population that hears some of these messages and those that don't. And that will make the difference whether or not this is successful, right? It goes from 55 to 61%. So people have to hear that message between now and when they get their ballots and when they turn in their ballots. So having a group out there that says, oh, we agree and we want you to vote, specifically they're out there saying like vote yes and transportation or whatever that ends up being. Just like Ryan was saying, it's set up and it's ready, but someone's got to kind of like take that baton and run with it, especially because, regardless they need it, but even more so if there's going to be more than one ballot question on there.
If I may, just that prompts an idea, and that is, given that in an off-year election, the voting demographic would likely be older folks, I wonder if in whatever education campaign may come about, and be nice to know who's going to do that at some point, but to emphasize choices. In other words, older adults, sometimes they're not driving. I mean, should we be emphasizing some of those points that it'll create more options for people, especially if we address connectivity issues and, more choices besides, driving one's car?
So that's why we asked those messages in the survey, and it's those messages that you saw that are going to resonate. So stick with those top 2, 3, because that's what's going to get you over the finish line. If it's testing at 67, 68%, go with that. Don't leave that. They're not going to be paying attention. They're going to be paying attention to many things.
Okay.
There's the mayor, there's the stadium, contradicting stadium maybe things, whatever other questions. We saw how some of that confusion may have contributed to some degree or another in Loveland last year. So even more essential to stick with those top 2, maybe 3, and just keep saying it over and over, because those are the messages that resonate with the most number of voters. And that would be my recommendation to whoever decides, hopefully somebody decides, to say, I want to go and fund a campaign that says specifically vote yes on whatever this ballot initiative is being, if you guys decide to move forward. But yeah, and they can point back to this website and all this work that was done prior to say, the county went out and talked to people, set up this website, this is what the response was. One thing I forgot to mention when Commissioner Shattuck McNally asked the question about how would you say, this compares to others, one thing that we were quite surprised about, usually there's a lot more pushback. Usually there's a lot more people saying, what are you talking about? You got plenty of money, or, we don't believe it. It's extremely rare to not have quite a bit of that activity on an interactive website, and we didn't see it. So for what that's worth.
Thank you. Commissioner Shannon McNally.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you all for your presentation. Of course, I kind of geek out on this stuff, so I have lots of questions spinning in my head. But one question I have right off the top is the no stuff, because that's kind of how we reapproached the behavioral health sales tax. I did when I wasn't commissioner, but worked on getting that. We went back to those who said no and did an education opportunity, and it really helped quite a bit. But I think there's that certain section of folks, especially in this day and age, after this federal kind of sweep of, all these government, I think perceived inefficiencies, they weren't there, and they started hiring critical people like nuclear people, not to be political, but I mean, it's just that overall, when I saw some of those surveys and stuff, just that really embedded group that will always think taxes are all too high. I mean, we all don't like doing this, paying a lot of taxes, but this is the work we do together to make our communities safe and thriving. So is there any, is there some kind of number that that number is never going to move, so we don't really spend time trying to educate them or at least raise awareness? Or is there any wiggle room in some of that group? Because I feel bad that some of those folks still have such a negative view of their local government officials when we're working so hard trying to take care of everyone. So maybe I'm just hopeful that maybe one of those folks will maybe find some positives that we are trying to help them. So
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and this, when it really comes down to it, you're never going to please everyone. So to kind of answer your question one way, I mean, I went back to this slide. I mean, I definitely think that 16% that say they're definitely going to vote no, even after being given all those pieces of information, those are folks that you're probably not going to convince, certainly not over a, 4-month, 3-month period, right? Like, if they're going to be convinced, it's going to take a significant effort. That being said, there's counties around Colorado and around the country where that number is not 16%, it's 36% or 40%. That's not the case here, right? So clearly there is enough support among folks that aren't already no voters. So it's more of a don't forget how important this is kind of turnout type. Hey, remember how important this is, not a persuasion or like a convincing like you were talking about. Obviously, whatever you can do to convince people that currently don't support what the county's doing is great. But for this to be successful, there doesn't have to be a significant amount of convincing to happen, I guess. And I know it's very typical to focus on the no voters and say, well, how can we bring them along? There's never going to be like an 80-20 issue in really any county anymore. So if that's the goal is, okay, we got to get this to 80-20, it's not going to happen. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
yeah, and I thought so, but I just wanted to, because you can spend a lot of time and investment, but, those folks, are worthy to listen to and talk about. But, and also I probably spend too much time. I'm always trying to, on social, but I took some screenshots of people's comments under some of those ads. And some of them are folks I know well for a very long time when I was very surprised. And so I actually ran into them over the weekend at the Fair and Rodeo and said, hey, good to see you. I want to talk to you. And when I said, I want to talk to you about this, I want to make sure you understand. And like, oh, no, I never said that. No, I think what you're trying to do is good. So I just thought that was interesting because, I have the screenshots here. And so I wasn't trying to confront them. I was trying to, use it as, hey, can I talk to you about this and share the information? So back to the comments I think that you had shared with Commissioner Kafalis. You talked about focusing on just the top two because of the numbers that you said on the pros of those, and but I'm wondering if you were still having a conversation, just talking about the small. I thought the small cost, high community value was a good tagline. So I'm just wondering. as we out, because we're at the fair and rodeo, it's a good time to talk to lots of people. And I'm just wondering, is that what you were saying, is just focus on the safety and the infrastructure maintenance? Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
Sure, and Brian can answer it. I don't want to speak for him, but I went back to this slide because this is really the slide that he was referring to in terms of safety, traffic congestion. Like, those are the things that really resonate with folks. Yes, you can talk about job opportunities, but if someone's not looking for a job, they don't really care about job opportunities. Or if they're not looking for different housing, they're less likely to care about different housing options. And so those other ones are kind of second tier or kind of second order, where you have to kind of sit down and explain to them, oh, here's how this could help with jobs and housing. Whereas the other ones are very straightforward. Look, this will result in improved readiness, improved safety, reduced traffic congestion. Like, those things are very easy for folks to grasp, and that's why they resonate.
Okay, I was looking at
This slide, and then the other slide that has the messages.
Yeah.
The other one. There we go.
Yeah. Okay.
So if 71% of the people you talk to are going to say yes because they hear it's 0.15 and it costs 15 cents on $100 purchase, it would not apply to groceries. If you have one thing to say to people in that county fair, that's what you say. Because if you say anything else, you have a much less of a chance. Same with the many bridges over 50 years. So that's what I mean by, if you have a campaign that's running and they have limited resources, they're only going to be able to maybe get one or two messages out just because they don't have $1 million. And so if you only if the voter only hears one thing, it's got to be one of those things that's going to give you your best chance of success.
Two of my responses back to people asked me questions last week was specifically on, do you guys charge sales tax on groceries? And
Yeah.
and I said nope, and this is
Yeah.
and I said all this, and we don't do diapers, and
Yeah.
and we're going to ask, when we ask, we will not be increasing
Yeah.
taxes on groceries, and that was
Yeah.
not favorably. So
Yeah.
what you're saying is actually my experience the last
Yeah.
week. So I wanted to share that.
Yeah.
But people are asking a lot of questions, and so I have kind of that little response now about what we charge sales tax on,
Right.
kind of on my little
Yeah.
clipboard over there, so I can cut and paste,
Yeah.
because a lot of people are asking that. So
Yeah.
thank you. That's all I have for right
Yeah.
now.
And then one quick follow-up, just to answer the question in a little more detail. You asked about, like, who do we talk to, and the convincing no's, like to Ryan's point. Spending more time with those unaffiliated, because that's a significant voting population, and the Democrats that may not be voting as much this year, but if they knew that this was on there because they agree with it, because those numbers just show that the likelihood of getting support in places like Fort Collins and Loveland is far greater.
Yeah, thank you. Pretty much provides a blueprint of, how you need to go about, what strategy you need to go about, so I appreciate that. We all know that, we've all run our own campaigns, so we clearly understand that focusing on the people that will come out and vote for something is the way to go, right? And not necessarily, like you said, this is not a persuasion, probably a persuasion campaign is probably not the way to go here. Can we put the taxes and on groceries in the ballot language?
So that's a perfect segue, and I might just
Okay,
move us
okay,
along
yeah.
here to the next step if we're okay with moving away from the polling
Yeah.
piece. And then I've got 3 or 4 slides here just to kind of quickly bring us home. But yes, so one big takeaway from that, let me see if I can get this in slide mode, is to actually add that to the ballot language. And so we've taken a stab at doing that, and we worked with Bill in the attorney's office. He couldn't be here with us today, but we shipped over to him the language of just saying not including groceries, and he came back with, you should probably include all these things. This is consistent with how we might approach it in another ballot item, and that's more accurate and descriptive. And so what we would recommend, so the grayed out text is what's new and added since what was sent out in the poll and what we tested. And then there's a couple things that we're actually going to propose to strike out. Well, just one thing actually, to strike out the "and" facilities. That was a question that came up last week, and that word seemed to create some confusion about, it sounds like buildings, and that's not intended. And so we don't really lose anything by removing that word, because really the focus is around transportation system infrastructure and mobility and all the other things that are noted there. So we would recommend moving forward with this language as modified based on what we learned from the polling and subsequent conversations. So we wanted to bring that to you and share it and see if you had any thoughts or responses or feedback to that.
Is food for home consumption too wonky? I mean, like, I don't know, like groceries and, I don't know. It feels, there's some awkwardness that I feel when I look at that. I mean, clearly, I think people know what that means, and well, it's shorter to write groceries.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk about groceries
Yeah,
and some kind of odd talk about groceries if you look that up.
right?
But nevertheless, it is what people are talking about. So I guess I don't know, instead of saying food for home consumption, I get why you want to make the distinction. It's sort of like the
Yeah.
ready-made foods aren't included, and, restaurants, yes, you're going to get taxed if you go to
Yeah.
Chili's or wherever, but yeah.
No, I
Okay.
think that's a good question. We can noodle
I mean,
with
I don't know how my
Bill
colleagues
around the
feel, but
language a
that-
little bit more. I think we want to make sure we kind of write it in a way that's just very descriptive, even if it's a bit wonky, but there may be a better way to say that.
Sure.
Yeah.
My experience with those folks that emailed me were asking me to clarify that. So, because that specific thing. So I just want to say it's just my experience that people are asking me to clarify. Does this mean this food that I get here and not just food for, and I don't even know what I said. I think I did say food for home consumption or, or I don't know how you easily explain that, but that I did get asked that twice last week. So it's just totally.
What does groceries mean?
Yeah, and does this mean what is it? Because you can buy a lot of things now in grocery store, especially some of these that have clothes and shirts and things in them. So is it, people think if it's inside the grocery store, does that mean it's not taxed?
Yeah.
That's what they were thinking, and I'm like, no, it's these items. So, because
Yeah.
it kind of tracks with some of the things I've already had questions for me in the last couple of weeks, and I would say this is from a Fort Collins Loveland demographic, so just sharing that. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is improved language. I agree with Commissioner Stevens. I'd like to see us replace food for home consumption with groceries. If the lawyers tell us that's acceptable, I think that would improve it even more so. And then, just to go back to my earlier point, not suggesting we should change the ballot language, but in the messaging, I do think there needs to be specific messaging how this will benefit the older voting demographic. But I'm not suggesting we say something like for all travelers, including older folks. But I think in our messaging, in our campaign, whoever does that, there should be a focus, or at least one focus on older adults since they're the ones who are going to be voting. What's in it for them? But I
Yeah.
agree,
Thank
groceries
you.
would be, that's a good point, good catch, good
And-
observation.
I'll add really quickly too, Mark was pointing out that the food for home consumption basically comes straight out of the Department of Revenue language that they recommend for when you're describing what applies, when sales tax applies or not. So that's the source of that language, which I'm 90% sure Bill got from
No, I
that source.
mean, I get it. It just feels awkward, and it's a bunch of words that just mean groceries, but.
Yeah.
And I see your point, colleagues, and I also think that it's also that technical legal thing that we have to have on there. And I think it's something with, if we put this, I want to say if, because we're still discussing this, haven't voted on it yet, but if we're putting this on the ballot to, that discussion or trying to do that education, because like I said, a lot of times folks think groceries, whatever's in the grocery store, maybe isn't taxed that way. And I'm probably one of those few people that goes through all the different taxable line items and looks at my receipt when I leave. But it's just something I think we could take care of in some of the campaigning or messaging out there, so then folks see it on the ballot. It might look a little jargony, but they understand what they're maybe more informed for what they might be voting for. Just a suggestion.
Thank you.
I'm okay either way. I don't care about it that much that I, I mean, sure. Sounds good.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. I'll just move us along here for the couple last slides. So I did provide a draft copy of the resolution that we've been working on. It's very similar to what we had last year. Definitely a bit of wording changes to be more specific around the safety mobility component. We did a little bit more work around the recitals in terms of prioritizing some of that and keying in on some of the wording that reflects our more recent transportation plan and so on. And then it goes on to include all these sections around the applicability and the exemptions and how it's used and when it's effective and all that. So it should look very familiar. It does include the newer language around the ballot question. And we still have a section in there about transparency and an annual report, just to remind everybody that accountability is an important component of that. And then references to the plan and the source of where the projects and how the funds might be spent is all included in that. So that's probably about all we have time for today, but that would appear next week too as we carry this forward. So if you have any questions or other input around that, in the next few days, let us know as we continue to refine that. There's it's still very much a draft, so we'll probably catch a few more typos and things like that before we would finalize it. So if we do move forward next week, August 12th would be the date that the commissioners, that you all would decide to refer it to the ballot for November. And then if referred, we'd have third-party partners who would lead a campaign. Staff at the county cannot do that. The county can't do that, but the webpage that we've created and all the information and all the factual information can live on and be a source of information. We have some understanding that a third party would move forward with campaign manager, and they would be the ones that could fund it and accept funding from others to help carry some of these messages forward that we've talked about today. And so I think you've given us great feedback, and hopefully we've answered your questions around the public information and the ballot language and the polling results and all that. But we would probably ask a final question about if you support moving this forward next week to consider putting it on the ballot. So.
Commissioner Cavallis?
Yes, thank you. I guess it would be helpful if that the partners who have committed, have they committed to, the campaign, so any information about that would be useful. And then also, how will this be conducted? Who will be presenting this at the Administrative Matters meeting? How will that go down?
So that would be me and others from the staff team presenting next Tuesday. And Bill will be there. And we, of course, work with our attorney's office and our sales tax. There's lots of people behind the scenes on any given item like this. We expect that we'll have folks from the community as well participating who may say favorable things. And we'll get the word out this week. I'm working with Michelle to get the word out that this item will be on there if you give us direction to do that. And so it would be similar to what we did last year in September.
This will be a discussion item with a specific public comment period? Is that what or these will just be part of the presentation?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The latter.
Thank you very much. Very helpful.
So does that mean you're supportive
Of what?
of seeing this come forward to us?
On next Tuesday?
Yeah, did you say that? I apologize if I didn't hear that
I didn't know
specifically.
that. That was the question, yes.
Yeah, I think that is a question.
Up there,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. I am also supportive.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And let us know in the meantime if
Sorry.
you have any other questions or comments as you look through those materials. And we will get you copies of these other slides as well. So those weren't up at the table this.
Commissioner Kvalos is generally a good proofreader, so I
Yeah.
imagine that he will be your
Let us know
help
if
in
you
that
catch
space.
anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that gives us a little time for Amy if she wants to come on up. Thank you all.
That's okay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yep. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Amy White, Code Compliance Supervisor. We have a couple items for you this afternoon. We're requesting authorization for 2 district court case matters. One involves property that is in the floodway. There's 3 parcels adjacent to each other, all owned by the same property owner. We placed a rubbish ordinance on one of the properties, and they moved it over to the second parcel. We put a rubbish notice on the second parcel, and they moved it over to the third parcel. So what we're requesting, with cooperation from the county attorneys, is due to recurring code violations across multiple adjacent properties under common ownership, we recommend addressing the matter through a single district court case that includes all the properties. So that's our first one. Our second one involves a case that is a frequent flyer with us. He's got several properties, all of which have violations on them. This one is kind of hung up with all the planning applications that need to go with it. We've given him several deadlines, and he refuses to comply with those. And some of the improvements to the property in the setbacks without required planning approval, building permits, and flood board approval. This includes apartments that were creatively put into different little nooks and crannies, water heaters, electrical work, a garage addition, a roof structure, signage, cargo containers, and septic systems. So, yes. So that is one. And let me clarify that these aren't on tomorrow's consent agenda, but they'll be on the 12th, okay? And then the last thing I want to touch on is the continuation of Jake's Farm violations. We're now on our 4th violation, or resolution. But the twist with this one is they have paid that first resolution, so they have paid $30,800. We would like to discuss that with you all in more depth next week. There's some maneuvering that needs to be done behind the scenes, and we're working internally with lots of different departments to get that done, so that all you guys will really need to do is tell us if you're willing to support what we're recommending next week. And that too will be on August 12th's consent agenda.
Thank you, Amy. Any questions for Amy? No? Okay. We
All right.
will look forward to seeing those on the
Quick.
August 12th consent agenda. Thank you, Amy. All right. Rebecca.
And as I transition into Community Development Director updates, I just want to commend Amy and her team for the amount of work that's going into a lot of these property cleanups. Recently, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of effort to utilize the tools that are available to co-compliance and working with the various courts and with our county attorney's office to start to prompt action on some of these properties that have long caused impact to neighbors and neighborhoods around some of these properties. And so Amy will bring more information next week about that property abatement, property cleanup program that utilizes the rubbish ordinance. But the co-compliance inspectors, Tony, Chad, and Alan are doing a great job of staying on top of those items, working compassionately with property owners who are in tough situations with properties that may need to be cleaned up. And there's a lot of great work happening in that team. I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Rebecca Everett, Community Development Director. The only other update that I have for you today is I wanted to let you know that we did receive a new application for a special event for the Earth Roamer group up in Estes Park, or near Estes Park. And that application has been routed for reviewing agencies to look at, and postcards were mailed out to residents, adjacent property owners in that area. We are starting to receive some public comments back, so you may hear from folks as well who have comments about that proposed special event. Please feel free to direct those comments back to me. We will be once we have comments from all the reviewing agencies and members of the public, we'll be making a decision on that special event.
Great, any questions? All right, thank you, Rebecca. Leslie, do you have anything?
In my 10 seconds or so, I don't have other major updates today other than to remind the public that the fair and rodeo is still happening for the next couple of days. You have your shirts on, thank you. And I know it's been a good time out there over the weekend. There's still rodeos happening tonight and tomorrow, as well as all the events at the fair and all the 4-H activities happening there. So it's a great time if people have a chance to get out there. See you at the rodeo tonight.
And I might suggest to anyone coming out to make sure they plan ahead and give themselves plenty of time with traffic. And there's a very unique and special performer for the rodeo that was very unusual and different than we've seen in years past.
Great, well, thank you. Anything else from anyone? All right, well, we'll hopefully see you at the fair tonight or tomorrow, and it's 2:31, and we are adjourned. Thank you.